It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Warren Kibbe. I had the pleasure of meeting, I think it was in La Jolla or at one of the cancer registry meetings. He is an expert in data science. He is currently the chief data officer at the Duke Cancer Institute at Duke University. Before that, he served as the acting deputy director of the NCI and also as the director of the NCI Center for Biomedical Informatics and Information Technology. And he's going to inform on a really important national initiative, the Children's Cancer Data Initiative.
Great. Thank you, Angela. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate getting the chance to talk about CCDI. And I think a number of the folks that I see participating in this are actually parts of CCDI already. So I'll try to make it informative for those of you who are not. One thing I did want to mention is that, at least from my perspective, a really important part of CCDI is getting access and reducing health disparities for pediatric cancer cases that aren't seen in one of the big institutions, and how do we help funnel them into the institutions where they get the best care. So I think that that's something that even though you didn't call that out as one of the hallmarks, I actually think health disparities is something that, if we're successful with CCDI, it will absolutely help with. And that's certainly something I want to make sure it can do. So I'm going to see if I can actually move this forward. Did I do that, or did you do that, Angela?
You did it.
Okay. Well, so I feel a little bit embarrassed in some ways presenting this slide to all of you, because you know it far better than I do. But of course, childhood and AYA cancers are rare diseases. And as you've already mentioned multiple times, having the data necessary to really support research is critical. And that is what CCDI is focused on for childhood cancers. So again, that is underpinning really everything in CCDI. And I thought I clicked right there, and it did. Sorry, I'm getting used to clicking on the screen and moving the slides forward. So what I wanted to present, and you've actually already heard about several of the things on this timeline, the Gabriella Miller Kids First Research Act back in 2014. And I apologize for the numbers not showing up properly. They're supposed to be in a single line. But it really starts back with the Holder memo in 2013, and that was a call for more transparency and data sharing in anything that is federally supported. And the Gabriella Miller Kids First Research Act was one of the first pieces that, in fact, really aligned well with the Holder memo. There are a number of NIH things that happened. The genomic data sharing policy was updated in 2015. The human data sharing policy also in 2015. The Cancer Moonshot, which I had the privilege to be involved with, and actually a number of folks on the call were involved with as well. Came out of the 21st Century Cures Act and of course a State of the Union address by President Obama in 2015, 2016 timeframe. And then there was a public access and data sharing policy in 2017, around the time that the Race for Children's Act that Nancy mentioned, and the STAR Act in the following year. And then in 2019 came the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative, CCDI. And there, around that same point in time, the National Cancer Advisory Board, which is one of the advisory boards for NCI. There was an ad hoc working group on data science that had a number of calls that were actually pretty aligned with what CCDI needs to do around data sharing. And then in last year, we had the ad hoc working group report on CCDI itself. So a little bit of history there that hopefully is useful and sets the stage for actually understanding CCDI itself. So as I mentioned, there was the State of the Union back in February of 2019. It really announced CCDI, and then a kickoff of a number of things, including a symposium that I think, again, a number of you were at back in July of 2019. And I'll say, as a former Fed, getting a symposium put together in a few months is pretty amazing for NCI to be able to accomplish, and that was no small feat. And Jamie Odrell-Goodry really did a wonderful job putting that together. Then there was a number of those reports I already mentioned, and then at the end of the year, funding was actually approved by Congress. So really, the if you will, the clock for doing things with CCDI really started then. So I'm not going to go through all of the pieces here, but this week, we just had our first real all hands meeting of the CCDI pieces, both the NCI pieces and then the external folks that all came together. And we're planning an annual symposium in November that I hope many of you, if not all of you, will attend. So again, when I think about CCDI, the most important part is we really want to learn from every child. And that's both learning what works, learning what doesn't work, improving quality of life and survivorship for all children. And a piece of this also reaches into how do we do a better job of shortening the time from initial diagnosis to treatment. How do we help children get their first cancer diagnosis more quickly so they can get that first therapy more quickly? And doing that all really through the lens of data. And we had a wonderful group of people come together and help advise the NCI in the working group. I think you'll recognize a number of names on the working group, and they all brought a lot of expertise and a lot of thinking to what should CCDI really try to accomplish. And that report really had 24 specific recommendations that all kind of roll up into these 7 different areas. And one of them was really understanding better the landscape of pediatric and AYA cancer, where some of the needs truly are, understanding how to collect and aggregate different types of data. And again, it really warms my heart to hear so many people already today talking about the importance of clinical data, well-structured data, making sure that it's accessible. I already was tweeting about how important it is that CBTN is making data available through 4 different pediatric networks. I think that's amazing. I don't know of anybody else who's been able to accomplish that. So kudos to everybody. Understanding what barriers there are to progress, stopping us from meeting some of these goals. Another part was generating new data. So knowing, for instance, where some of the data gaps are. Where do we have enough data? Which pediatric cancers really would most benefit from new data generation? And not just the distinction between research and clinical data, but really the synergy between the two. So how do we particularly think about getting clinical data, which we know, particularly from a diagnostic standpoint, needs to be in the clinician's hands, the care team's hands, really quickly? How do we do the same thing for researchers? How do we make sure that, in fact, they have access to data as quickly as the clinical team and appropriately? Then another part, and this is part of why I really enjoy being here, is engaging with all the different diverse stakeholders to make sure we're doing the right things. And I have a really nice slide, a graphic of the structure for CCDI, which somehow I didn't actually put in my presentation, so I apologize for that. And then make sure that we're paying attention to those opportunities for transformative discoveries. So we have actually a pretty I think, a pretty well thought out structure for how to get some of that input, how to make sure that NCI gets the right set of recommendations to make all this really work. And like I said, unfortunately, the slide that highlights that I did not include, so I apologize for that. But I will make sure that that goes out, and I'll post all my slides publicly for you to be able to see. So some of those recommendations I already mentioned from the CCDI working group, but this is kind of a summary of actually not just that working group, but the other ones I've mentioned. The Blue Ribbon Panel had pieces that were really relevant, not just for data sharing, but how do we move forward in pediatric cancer. The symposium that was held, there were also a number of discussion points that were really important that have been included and foundational to these recommendations. And then there was an informatics working group that had, again, a number of recommendations around how to make clinical data and research data more accessible to researchers and the care team. I think, again, it's easy to silo those two groups, and that's something we absolutely don't want to do. So this should give you a little sense, and I didn't mean to back up if I did that. It should give you a sense of then some of the specific activities that all those different groups were really recommending. And one of them, and this is, since it is a data initiative, is really establishing this idea of a federated infrastructure. And what that really means is that we don't want to see that CCDI becomes a different silo, and that CCDI really takes advantage of things like what the CBTN has done, and not trying to either replicate or duplicate. So one of those activities really is this central resource, if you will, a catalog of what's available, and making that publicly available to the entire research community. And again, making sure that's, in fact, even though this is an NCI initiative, making sure that's global. And that's going to be, again, a little difficult and a little bit uncomfortable for NCI to be able to do some of those pieces, because that's not usually the role they have. So see if I can figure out how to go forward again. There it is. So this is a graphic on CCDI that I think really nicely outlines some of the types of data that we want to make sure we consistently capture. And again, I've heard this brought up for pediatric brain tumors already during the meeting, but it's making sure there's clinical data, there's data about the treatments that each child receives, understanding what their outcomes are, being able to provide appropriate molecular characterization, whether that's sequencing, whether that's proteomics. Certainly, things like the methylome are incredibly important in pediatric cancer. Making sure that there's a strong biospecimen component to this. And again, CCDI may not be building all those pieces, but we want to make sure that it's accessible. And then doing that from a longitudinal standpoint. That's clear from outcomes that there's a longitudinal piece, but it really is following the children throughout their adult lives as well as their childhood, and then doing that at a population level. Right? So it's not just at particular research organizations, but really making sure that these tools and the components that are built by CCDI are available to everyone in the whole country. And that really is the essence of thinking about the health disparities that may be experienced in some populations. So I was going to go through a number of really detailed slides here, but I recognize that we're behind in time. So I am going to just talk about this one slide, and then I'm going to wrap up actually. So then there are really these four components. It's building this strong base, which means that there is a place to put all the data. Be able to build a catalog again of what's necessary to understand different types of pediatric cancers. Make sure that the data itself is easy to use and easy for people to have access to. I'll say that it's there. Along with that, it's not just the data; it is the biospecimens too. We want to make sure that whatever we do, we're also making the biospecimens accessible. And I know all of you get that because I've heard you talking about the importance of those biospecimens already. But just so you know that certainly I believe, and actually I think everyone involved in CCDI believes that's really important as well. And then, of course, it's also using all that to improve treatments for children. And I appreciated the comments, and I now I don't remember if it was Ellen or Nancy mentioned that we need to do more than just give single therapies. We need to understand how to really start to provide cures, and that's a harder problem, which is why we haven't done it yet. So I'm gonna skip over a whole bunch of slides, and I'm gonna. Boy, these come up very slowly. Sorry about that. I guess skipping slides isn't really a quick thing to do. I do want to, though, I'm going to pause on this one briefly and say that this idea of a federated data ecosystem, you're already doing that for pediatric brain tumors. I think what we really want to do is learn how you've been doing that and make sure that, in fact, we can replicate that for all kinds of pediatric cancer. And it really is about interoperability, making data much more accessible, reducing all the barriers to people being able to ask for biospecimens. And again, I'm going to skip over that, but making data easy to use, that is a little bit in the eyes of the beholder. So it depends who you are, whether it's easy or not. And I certainly recognize that. And I think, again, that's really important that we're making it accessible to different communities. Likewise, this idea of assembling data, it's for what purpose? And different groups, whether you're running a clinical trial or you're doing basic science discovery, or you're trying to develop a new compound, better data means something different. So we want to make sure it's better data and it's fit for use. Skip over most of these, but this is very much aligned with the RACE Act. And we see that being able to improve treatments, it's not just CCDI alone that's going to do this. In fact, CCDI is about data. It's not about treatment, but it is hopefully about how do we make data available more globally for improving treatments. And sorry, can't quite go as fast as I'd like through all those because I do recognize I'm over time. But again, it is really that concept for CCDI. We want to learn from every child, and in doing that, I really think we have an opportunity to truly build a learning health system for children, for children's cancer. And that's something I'll say that when I was at NCI, I really pushed hard this idea of a national learning health system for cancer. But in the adult setting, frankly, it's too big, too diffuse, and I feel like we have a real opportunity to do something useful in pediatric cancer. So I'm going to bring it to a close with this slide. Again, I'll make sure the slides are all available to everyone because you can't click on those links, but I'll make sure the links get sent to everyone. in how to engage with CCDI. And all this is all publicly available, and we look forward to your answering your questions.
See, Warren, there's one question that I'm going to rephrase slightly, but asking kind of should CCDI focus on brain tumors and then develop models for others to follow? In other words, should the NCI be leading this? And I guess I would ask the reverse question, your viewpoint on why CBTN has been a good partner in actually helping to lead some of the data initiatives on the brain tumors. So just your perspective in terms of CCDI and CBTN.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one is I don't think actually CCDI as it's been constructed is about NCI leading. And that's again, really important distinction. So I would say your question, Angela, is the proper one. How do we take what CBTN's done and make that a model for many other pediatric cancers? Because it does seem like you've got all the right pieces. And I think to Mike Prados's point, it's really important that some of these things be investigator driven and focused on the expertise in the community, and it can't be top down. The top down pieces are, how do we make sure that things like the data sharing that all of you are already doing, that becomes a universal good? I think that actually NCI can help with that, and that having good data sharing policies in place does help with that. And I think that's where I see the CCDI being able to use the examples that CBTN's already put together. So I think that's a great question, and that's the way I would reframe it. Is I believe we can, and I'm looking forward to all of you helping inform us exactly how to do that.
Warren, maybe I know we're a little bit over time, but I think it's a question that's come up in our community multiple times, and it's an area where I really have thought CCDI is taking a really thoughtful look. Is access to molecular diagnostics and leveraging that approach to potentially address disease contexts that may not have been equally addressed in the past. And so maybe to Robert's point about where do brain tumors fit in the landscape, one area that I really saw CCDI think thoughtfully about this is in the molecular protocol. And maybe you can just say a couple of words, around the molecular protocol effort.
Sure. So, and I'm sorry I didn't have, I somehow didn't, I left this slide out, but one of the key components for CCDI is this molecular characterization protocol. And the idea of that is, at least the way I think about it, is it's laying a minimum bar for how to go about characterizing every pediatric cancer patient. It's some of it's going to be DNA sequencing of germline. It's going to be DNA sequencing of tumor. It's going to be doing RNA sequencing, particularly looking for fusions and looking for other events that are not easy to pull out of the genome, and then looking at the methylome. So what epigenomic pieces are present, and if we do that uniformly across many different diseases, we think that that's a really important platform for discovery. And at the same time, it's very clear that as large as CCDI is, it can't pay for that for every child across the country. And on top of that, many pediatric cancers are already being characterized at least at that level, if not even with more detail. So it's kind of filling in the gaps. So to your point, Adam, where are those opportunities that we can actually lift that level of characterization in particular diseases where we think it really will have either short-term or long-term real impact on the disease? So again, that's where I think we are looking to all the different pediatric cancer experts to say, well, where exactly are those opportunities, and how do we go about prioritizing them? Because again, that's just from a pragmatic, the finances right now for CCDI is $15 million a year. We think we can probably characterize about 3,000 patients a year with that kind of detailed characterization, and recognize that's not enough to do everybody. So how do we deploy that most effectively?
Perfect. Thanks.
Sorry, that was a long answer to your
No, it's
your
perfect.
question.
Yeah, like I said, you guys are tackling really challenging, but really latent opportunity in CCDI, and thanks so much for coming today to talk to our community.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.